Casey Schreiner. Thank you for doing the interview.
Of course, yeah. As I said, I'm very, very excited to be a part of this and share whatever stupid stories I can remember.
Well, here's my first question to you. Simple. You're on IMDb listed as writer and then head writer. How did you get that job as writer on Attack of the Show? How did your career evolve, and when did you start working at TV? I want to know the quick origin of Casey Schreiner.
Okay.
If it was in a copy.
Sure. So I moved out to LA in 2003. I grew up in a small town in New England in rural Connecticut, went to school at Boston University, got a degree in TV writing, and was actually out here in like late 2002 doing some internships in LA. So I interned in the writer's office of Malcolm in the Middle, and then went back to Boston to graduate, moved to LA immediately afterwards, so kind of like summer 2003, and kind of did the same thing that everyone does when they kind of move out there. You scramble for jobs, you work your network, you try to find someone who will pay you a little bit of money to do something, even if it's only for a week or two. So I did that for, months, when was really, really having a lot of trouble finding something that was relatively steady. Worked on a couple pilots, worked on some temp jobs and stuff like that. And very, very late in 2003, I believe, maybe it was even 2004, and I think it was 2003, I just browsed across a listing on entertainmentcareers.net for a temporary PA position on the G4 network for a show called Players. And I had heard of G4, but I'd never had access to it. And I knew it was a gaming thing, and I knew it was kind of like, the elevator pitch was like MTV for gamers. I grew up playing video games. I still play video games. I love video games. I'm a big nerd into gaming culture in all of its aspects. And also I needed a job. So I figured, hey, I'll apply to this thing. We'll see what happens. And I actually was in a pretty low point in looking for jobs at that point, and actually had booked a ticket to fly back home. It was like between that weird period, kind of between Thanksgiving and the Christmas holiday, where not really anything happens in entertainment, and everybody's looking for an excuse to get out of LA and just go home anyway. So I went home and I was like, in January I'm going to come back and I'm going to renew these efforts full bore. Ended up remote applying to this position and getting asked to come in for an interview. And I remember talking to the producer of the show and even offering to fly back from Connecticut to LA for the interview. And she was very, very kind in saying that I didn't have to do that. And she brought me back on for that position. So I worked. Actually, no. I'm mixing up a couple stories here. The short version is I applied to be a temporary PA around the end of the year for Players. It was like a 6-week gig. So I was filling in for that, and very, very old, not original G4, but definitely like old school G4 before Tech TV came along. That wrapped up, and there wasn't really any position there for me to move into full time. So I went back to Connecticut to kind of recoup over the holidays and kind of come back in the new year with full force. And that's when there was a position on another show called Arena that had opened up for a production assistant position. So that's the one that I had attempted to, or I offered at least to fly back to LA for to interview it. The producer said that was not necessary. I can interview over the phone. So I had my first interview over the phone from across the country. Ended up getting that position, and then that started, I think, January of 2004. And then I was a PA on Arena, and I kind of like stayed at G4 through a lot of stuff. So I was on Arena for a little while. When Tech TV came down, I was one of, I think, 2 G4 employees that made the switch to a Tech TV program. I really, really liked the Tech TV show Unscrewed with Martin Sargent. I had like a comedy background, so I kind of wanted to do more like jokes or at least mildly narrative stuff at G4 if that was possible, and the stuff that they were doing on Unscrewed was really weird and fun. So I went over to work on Unscrewed for I think about half a year, maybe 6 months or so, before the great tightening when most of the Tech TV people were unfortunately let go. And then from there I moved from Unscrewed to the Screensavers, which then became Attack of the Show, and then I was on Attack of the Show for the entire run. Started as an associate producer, then moved to a writer, and then moved to head writer for the last several years of the show.
You say that like it's like a simple thing. Is there anything you remember about that process at the beginning, like the kind of people they were curating to be to be a part of the team? Because really, when you look at the people who were curated to be a part of Attack and G4 in general, it was an incredibly unique mix of people.
Yeah. It was a really amazing group of people that were involved in both the G4 and the Tech TV side. Really, really impressive people in kind of all walks of life and all experiences. I went to school for TV writing and was pretty heavily involved in sketch comedy. At BU, I kind of ran a sketch comedy group for the 4 years that I was there. So I was definitely interested in the comedy aspects, but coming from this like well-baked-in nerd perspective, I pushed really, really hard to get into the Unfiltered team. And I do remember that when the Tech TV folks came down, they did have some open interviews, both like on all the Tech TV shows. So I think it was Screensavers, definitely, Unscrewed. I forget what the name of the gear show was. There was a really good gear show that they did that was down there as well. And I remember interviewing for a position on the Screensavers as well, just because I also just wanted to do something that was like more live TV. Players and Arena were both kind of pre-taped shows that were fun, but not really as interesting as to me as doing something live or live to tape. So I remember interviewing for that, and at that time, the Screensavers and Tech TV. Screensavers was kind of transitioning from this kind of old school direct call-in help show, which kind of spun off to Call for Help a little bit, but they still answered pretty hardcore technical questions. And I remember one of the showrunners who eventually became a showrunner on Attack of the Show, and I worked with for many, many years. But I remember him asking me in my interview to be an associate producer on this TV show if I knew how to install a video card. And I remember thinking that was like a really weird question to ask at a job interview. And I know how to install a video card. I've built computers before, but like I just remember thinking like, but also I can make TV for you too if that's the thing you're interested in. I'm in the end I'm glad that I went to Unfiltered first. Unfiltered is where I met Guy Branum for the first time, and I worked with him for years and years and years afterwards. Still very good friends with him, and just being in that sort of like Unfiltered was definitely like the weirdest show on G4 and Tech TV, maybe with Cinematech kind of like neck and neck at that time. And I was really good friends with the Cinematech guys, still am. And it was really fun being on one of the really weird shows at G4. And then, when we moved over to the Screensavers and then had that opportunity to kind of rebrand as Attack of the Show a little bit later, I really wanted to bring as much of that weird energy into Attack of the Show as possible that first time. And I think based on if you've seen Attack of the Show, I think you will know that some of that weirdness definitely did come through.
Do you remember meeting Kevin Pereira for the first time? I mean, didn't he start out as a PA on Arena?
Yeah.
Do you remember meeting his mustache?
I honestly don't remember if he had the mustache when I was with him or not on Arena. I do remember him. He hosted Arena for a long time. Kevin bounced around. He was on G4TV.com, and then he did Arena. And I mean, I remember him being a really cool guy. I remember him being super funny, very approachable. I mean, he was a TV host who was also a production assistant on another show, which on the one hand is like insulting, but on the other hand is like that's kind of how G4 was at that time. Like I was also a production assistant, and I was like pitching segments, and I was like producing segments, and on Unfiltered they would let me just go off and do whatever I wanted. And then as long as I had like 30 seconds of bumper material to fill in, they just put it on TV. Like that's not a thing that happens in TV anywhere before or since, I don't think. And you know, the downside of that is like you get a lot of stuff that maybe shouldn't have made it to TV in some form or another. But the flip side is you get a lot of just this like unbridled creativity, and you let people have input into their shows, which gives them a sense of ownership for what they do. I've worked on a lot of other projects where you know, production assistants and even associate producers and even in some cases writers or head writers like are not really allowed to say things. There's like a more strict hierarchy of who's allowed to talk first and whose ideas take precedence. And for the most part, G4 was a place where anyone could pitch anything at any time, and it had a pretty good chance of making it to TV. And the fact that Kevin was, you know, hosting two shows while also having to log tapes and like make runs for people is like kind of indicative of that whole spirit at that time.
That's crazy. Like, just they were putting like producer duties on PAs effectively.
Yeah,
which is not a bad thing.
Yeah, they were making PAs producers. Everyone could be on air talent. There were no qualifications for being on air or being on camera at any time. You know, I've done some performance, but like I don't perform. That's not like my profession. My profession is writing. But I really liked it, and it was fun to do. But, you know, when I was at Attack of the Show or on Unfiltered or Screensavers and we needed someone to be in a sketch, you'd turn to some producer who wasn't busy, who had 10 minutes to kill, and you'd say, hey, can you come and do something really stupid for us on camera? Like, that's how people got on camera at G4. It's like you were available and you weren't awful.
Oh, my God. What... Tell me what it was like to be in that writer's... Well, let's actually back up a bit. Tell me about the transition from Screensavers to Attack the Show. My understanding is that there was a contest to rename Screensavers, and there was some, you know, big reward for whatever it was. If it was an iPod. I think it might have been an iPod.
Yeah, I think it was an iPod.
Can you tell the story as you remember it?
Yes.
Can you tell the story as you remember it, and then also, what were some of the discarded names that were in consideration instead of Attack the Show?
So I don't really remember a lot of the other names that were in the running, but when you know, when Screensavers came down, and after a lot of the tech TV people were, you know, fired or laid off or whatever. It was clear that, you know, the Screensavers continued. It continued for several months after that, but it was clear that it was a different show, and it was clear that it had to be a different show. You know, I remember watching Screensavers when I was younger. Like, I had tech TV sometimes when I was at home, and it was a really cool show. Like, one of my favorite bands, They Might Be Giants, was on it a ton. It just had a lot for nerd culture, but it was definitely like of its era. It was like a mid-90s, late 90s show. And in the early 2000s, you know, not many people needed to know how to install a video card. You were asking other types of questions or learning about internet culture, or just like looking for a place to hang out with people who were similarly minded to you. So I think it was clear that the show itself had to change in some capacity, and the clearest way for the audience at that time, specifically, you know, new viewers, hopefully, but also these tech TV viewers who were like, what the heck are you people doing to this show that I've been watching for, I don't know how long Screensavers was on. Like, that show was on for a long time. Like, to come in and have your show basically totally changed up, but have it still called the Screensavers was confusing. It's bad branding, and if you're a fan who's, you know, been there for a long time, it can be kind of insulting too, because you're like, this is not the show that I like. So I think for a lot of reasons, it was a really good idea to change the show and rebrand the show as something new. And there was a contest. There was a company-wide, I think it was anonymous, or like you just emailed some ideas in they wanted a new name for this show in some capacity. And there were, I don't remember what the guidelines were or if it was kind of a free-for-all at that, but that particular environment in that office building, which was on Olympic Boulevard, kind of West LA near Culver City-ish, like between Culver City and Santa Monica, that building had a really good communal feel to it, because it was kind of an open air situation where, like, you know, Attack of the Show sat next to Unfiltered, sat next to the Screensavers, and Filter was down here, and Cinematech was over there, and like everybody was kind of in the same mix, and you really got a good sense of, like, you could stand up and yell something, and like someone else across the building could stand up and respond, and like it was a really good community for as tense as that environment was, especially during those like periods of layoffs and just sort of uncertainty. But there was kind of an open air contest of name this show and maybe you get a prize. And I think the prize was like an iPod Touch or maybe like an iPod Nano or Mini or something. I forget what it was at that time. I do remember when it was announced, a very good friend of mine, I sat next to him for almost my entire time at G4. He was a producer named Mike Shaw. He was on Attack of the Show for the whole time. He came up with the idea to call it Attack of the Show, and he wrote this manifesto for it, because when they announced the name of the show on this company-wide email, there was some very, very strong, anonymous, of course, backlash to it, saying it was the dumbest name, it was the worst name they'd ever heard, it was going to sink the whole network, and like everyone was just going to go up in flames over it. So Mike Shaw like wrote a manifesto as to why Attack of the Show was a good name for it, and he was right. Like it was a kind of a great name. It was active. It was weird. There was nothing else like it. It had the word show in it. It had an exclamation point, which is always fun. It had that live vibe to it. I think it was actually the perfect name for the show, and I was in on it 100% as soon as I heard it. But there were a lot of people that needed to be convinced, and both at the network, like executive level and below, and I kind of honestly think fans too. I think people came to like that name, maybe begrudgingly. It doesn't really roll off the tongue necessarily, but I kind of like that about it. I kind of respect a show that makes you work to say its name.
I will say that I knew the name of the show, Attack of the Show, after Kevin Purcell interviewed me with Keith and basically offered me the job to do the movie coverage, TV Newsday. But he told me the name, and I remember thinking, that's a terrible name, that's awful. And then it grew on me, like it grew on everybody. You know what I mean? It's just like, hey, because I was a Screensavers fan, and I really liked, it was sort of mix of Peck, and it was becoming more of a show. But yeah, I remember really initially not liking it. Do you have a copy of that manifesto? Because a couple of people have brought it up, and I want to put it in the Dawkins. Can you find it somewhere?
I don't. I can probably bug Mike Shaw to see if he still has it. I can shoot him an email. The name of the show, Mike Shaw and I have a very long history of enabling each other's bad ideas and making them better. So I think me and some of the other folks that were around him when Attack of the Show came out and it came out as his, we were like, yep, we are on board. We support this. We will keep pushing and fighting and ignoring other people to make your very silly name a reality.
You know that he's heading up the new Attack of the Show, right?
I do, yeah.
It's exciting.
So I'm not involved with that at all. I kind of hope that at some point someone will ask me to do something for it. But Shaw did. He talked to me. He called me the day before they announced that trailer because he wanted me to see it before it launched. So he was on the phone while I watched it, and like within about 10 seconds, I was like, "You fuckers are relaunching G4, aren't you? Like, how can you do this?"
Wow. Well, a couple things. Like, can you tell me what was it like day in the life from the writer's perspective, from your perspective as a writer. And I was fortunate enough having, I would sort of substitute host whenever there was an issue. I was on call, right?
Yeah.
To jump in. So I remember sitting at read-throughs and whatnot, but from where you sit, can you walk through, like, this is what it's like to be a writer, and this was sort of a day in the life of making a show, from your first meeting of, like, going through the news and seeing what happened that day to, creating the script, to having the read-through, like, at lunch, to basically clapping behind the scene, off camera. Like, walk us through a day in the life.
Yeah, so the world of writing on Attack of the Show changed a lot during its run. When I first started on it, I was an associate producer, and we had one writer who wrote the entire show, all of the kind of host copy, all of the tags and teases, and then I and Mike Shaw and I think Brian Keller and maybe a few other people were like kind of the de facto like comedy team on the show, where we sort of were able to do our own sketches and write. Like, I wrote most of the sketches that I did. Eric wrote a lot of sketches as well, and Shaw wrote a lot of sketches. We all kind of like wrote with each other, but it was kind of separate from the daily show aspect for the most part. So that's kind of how I started writing on the show, was kind of just focusing on the sketches, stuff like the early stuff like Home Road and Office Jesus and like some of those other like kind of recurring characters. And there were some other producers who kind of did their own thing on it too. Jeff McFarland was a line producer and a producer on the show. His early thing, it was a Drunk Vader was his big thing, and that was basically like he just kind of did those himself. Like, that was like someone put a camera on him and said go, and like he just did those. So like there wasn't like a lot of writing involved in those, but there was a lot of good like communal input on like what was on the show and what was made funny on the show. Over the years, the show progressed a little bit. I became officially a writer and was still focusing mainly on the comedy stuff, but then was more involved with like tags and teases, intros and outros, doing top of the day stuff, doing some of the news segments for the feed. And then by the time that I had taken over as head writer, we had like a bona fide writer's room. Like, the big thing that I really wanted to do when I became head writer, because at that point, Around the Net was kind of like the big segment in the show. I think it was the longest in terms of time. And that one was where all the comedy stuff happened, where we did basically a sketch every day. And we had a team of, I think at its maximum, we had like 6 writers, and then it was Mike Shaw and maybe another segment producer who would do like the producing of the sketches. But that was like a really intense writing environment. This was, 6 people doing a daily live hour-long show every day, Monday through Thursday, 2 shows taping on Thursday because you have a wrap-up show on Friday. And you basically have an entire script for your show done by noon. So from 8 a.m. to noon, we would go in the morning. We had a couple producers who would kind of troll the internet looking for viral videos. We'd watch a ton of viral videos from all over the place. This was kind of before and as these sort of aggregator blogs were starting. But this was just like people were just going around the internet and looking for stuff, and we'd watch it all. We'd find the ones that we liked. We'd try to pitch ideas for sketches if there was one. You'd have to argue your idea sometimes with the EPs on the show or some of the other producers. And then we'd all split off and write it. And then we would kind of get together later on in the day and try to like see how we could punch up each other's material, especially for Around the Net. Around the Net became a very collaborative writing thing by the time I had left, where it was basically all the writers worked together on Around the Net for the first couple hours and just kind of really hash out everything. We're throwing jokes at each other. We're trying to make each other's jokes funnier. We're trying to get as weird as possible and do some really fun stuff. And then if we had a pre-taped sketch, great. That's a little less work for us. If we had to do a day of sketch, which was more than likely true, we'd have to also kind of beat out and then go and write a full sketch in about an hour or two while finishing up the rest of the show. So all of the copy that goes, hey, coming up next is X, Y, and Z, or some joke after a segment that had aired, or a field package or an interview. That was all stuff that we had to come up with too. So it was a lot of writing. It was definitely like a boot camp for writing TV, and it was a really awesome way for me to kind of learn how to write late night style TV, to do it quickly, to do it for a live environment. There's not a lot of live comedy stuff on TV anymore. There certainly wasn't much when G4 was around, and there was none that was targeted toward the audience that we were going for. So it was a very unique position. By the time I had left G4, or by the time G4 had ended, I was, in my late 20s, and I had, thousands of hours of live TV writing and production under my belt, which is, I was like, by decades, I had like the most experience in my group. The people who had as much experience as I had were like old time game show producers and writers. It was just like kind of an old, like a little bit older generation. So it was definitely a weird thing, but it taught me so much about writing and so much about how to be funny on a deadline, how not to waste time with stuff, how to get stuff on TV live and make it work, and not to get too attached to it, to find out what works, find out what doesn't, try to keep doing stuff that's good and learn from your mistakes. Those are all really invaluable lessons that I think Attack of the Show taught everybody who worked on it. And every other show that I've worked on since G4 has felt so slow to me, because I'm still so used to coming in at 8:30 in the morning and having the script done by noon, having it tweaked by 2, having it done by 5 p.m., and then you're out the door waiting for the next one. Most entertainment does not work that quickly. So I always find myself like wishing other people could move faster, or we could like kind of move things along. And I think G4 and Attack of the Show has ruined me in that regard for entertainment writing.
Well, it was incredible, like how young everyone was. For many people that worked there, it was their first job in television.
Yeah.
So, I really, just having done work for networks like IFC and Stars and FX, I was sort of done with TV. I was just like, I don't want it. Gavin convinced me, and whenever I would see people complain there, I'd say, "You have no idea that you have." It's like the best place I've ever worked.
Yeah.
It was the least money I ever made. It was the best place I ever worked. But I want to talk about specific bits and things, like, and kind of really take a deep dive into some of the stuff. I know that, like, I have personal experience with a thing that you directed called Frankenprairie that resulted in a new rule about how kids were used. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? And then I want to go through some of the specific bits that you wrote and even characters that you played.
Oh, yeah, of course.
We can start with that one.
Of course, yeah. So early on, I think that was pretty early on in Attack of the Show. There was a segment that was a holdover from the screensavers called User Created. And it was basically, it was kind of a fan service thing and a way for us to like ask our fans, hey, would you like to like be part of the show in some capacity? We actually had really, really creative and talented fans, which is not surprising. These were guys and gals that were like, learning Photoshop on their own, or writing GIMP software, or like, recording early songs like before like YouTube was a thing, or there was even a place to put them. So we had some really cool fans, and one of those segments I think was like, it was like create some new breakfast cereal for the hosts of the show. And I think I can't remember who did that one, but there was a pitch for Frankenprairie, which I then turned into a full-on 1980s breakfast cereal commercial with Kevin Pereira as this horrible Frankenstein's monster. And of course, if you have an 80s breakfast cereal commercial, you need some kids in it. So we got, was it your like nephew or yeah, it was your nephew.
No, that was my son and my daughter.
Oh, it was your actual kids. Okay. So we were,
and my son, by the way, that little kid, the little boy that did it, my son,
yeah,
he's 26 years old now, and he's a U.S. Marine.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
Crazy.
So
anyway, sorry, I don't want to interrupt you.
Yeah. So if you're doing a breakfast commercial, you need some kids in it. G4 had $0 to spend on budgets for actors, which is why most of the producers ended up being on camera. And it was difficult, if not impossible, for us to hire kids. Even though G4 was a non-union network at that time, there's a lot of other sort of things that you have to do if you're hiring a kid to be on camera. There's like, you have to have a teacher on set, and there's like just a bunch of things that like we could not afford to do. So we asked Chris Gore to like basically donate his children to be on camera for this bit, and I think they ended up like they had to like scream a lot and like maybe have like blood packets in their mouth or something. It was like not a thing that like most kids should be doing, but they were really fun, and the segment ended up turning really fun. And I don't know where that is now. I haven't even thought about that in a really long time, but that was definitely like of that caliber of just like, here's an idea for a sketch that we got from one of our fans who just did a Photoshop of a box of a cereal called Frankenprairie, and now it is, a 2-minute breakfast commercial that got us in trouble with the president of the network for using kids and not having a teacher on set.
Well, they loved being a part of it, and it wasn't a problem for them at all. I think they were paid in like coin.
Probably. I mean, we barely got paid, so.
Yeah, exactly. Tell me about, you mentioned that like people, because getting talent for the network was so difficult. If you were a writer or an intern or worked in any capacity, I often were on camera. Can you tell me about the development of some of the things like Office Jesus, your character, and how that evolved, which became a very popular character, and then the side characters became very popular unto themselves.
Yeah, G4 and Attack of the Show had this sort of rotating cast of characters. Part of it, I think initially that stuff started just because they wanted, when I say they, I mean like the EPs at the time and maybe some of the network executives. They just wanted something new and different and unusual to start every show. Or like 3 shows a week, I think was the start. It was like Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday or whatever. If you can fill, 20 seconds at the top of each show, that's a good thing. And that's kind of what I used to do when I was on Unfiltered. I would do these really weird like bump ins and bump outs that were like 15, 20 seconds of just like weird, ominous, like unsettling things. So they kind of wanted something similar for Attack of the Show, which became, let's just fill something and make something weird and just put it on TV. There was no approvals process for this that I can remember. Like, I never got those initial ideas like approved or had to pitch them to anyone. It was more, we have 30 seconds to fill. What do you have for us? So that was the start of a lot of the folks that were kind of around me. Brian Keller and Mike Shaw and Eric Alt were kind of all just sort of generating these like weird ideas. And then Shaw and I, and sometimes Brian Keller, would just go out and shoot them and just make them weird. So Office Jesus was just a sketch. It had nothing to do with G4. It had nothing to do with Attack of the Show. It had come from, there was this meme of like these really kind of like beautiful looking pencil etched drawings of Jesus like helping people doing stuff, where he was like, he had his arm around someone playing football, or he was like helping someone go shopping, or he was like helping someone like crunch some numbers in an office or something. And I just thought they were so weird and kind of unhinged that I had pitched the idea of asshole Jesus. So not Office Jesus, but asshole Jesus, which is basically what that character is. And I shot the first 3, which was, I think, one was him in an elevator, one was him not giving someone a donut, and I think another one was him like taking the last bit of coffee. And it's basically just like Jesus being a jerk to people at work, but you can't say anything bad because it's Jesus. So that's it. That's the whole bit. And somehow that became a character that lived from like the first week of Attack of the Show all the way through the end of it. I don't know if that character had strong enough legs to withstand that time period. And I definitely fought people trying to use it a lot more frequently than I wanted it used. But I think those sketches are still really funny, mostly just because they're like standalone dumb, physical comedy sketches where I get to be a jerk to people. So that's where that stuff came from. It was literally like, we have 30 seconds or a minute to fill. What do you have? And then I think over time, those characters bled into, Attack of the Show started putting more comedy into itself. So like, people started to come to expect there to be a sketch in some capacity, whether that was a pre-taped bit or something that came out of, a viral video or some news of the day. And X-Play was doing kind of the same thing. X-Play was a video game review show, but X-Play was a comedy show. Like, X-Play did comedy sketches that were really elaborate and really good. So there became this sort of like, there wasn't like, it wasn't necessarily a rivalry, but it was a sort of like, how can we support and also one-up the other guys? There were really, really awesome people on X-Play. Mike Leffler, Blair Butler, and Paul Bonanno, I think, are the folks that come to mind, although I know there's more over there. Guy Branum was writing on X-Play for a long time that just were doing really funny stuff. And I remember being on Attack of the Show and going like, that stuff is really funny. We should do stuff that's really funny too. And it was just this kind of mutual appreciation / rivalry society that I think made both shows better. And whenever we got to work with those guys in some capacity, whether they would just help us out acting in a bit, or they'd give us an idea for something, or even if they would like walk past us while we were working on something and pitch a joke for it, that to me was like kind of the true magic zone of like the G4 comedy stuff, was when we were kind of all not necessarily working together like kind of like on the same show, but like as the same network and working as a team. That was like when really, really cool stuff happened on G4.
It was a healthy competition. I don't think there was any sort of unhealthy rivalry. It was definitely mutual appreciation amongst. There was a lot of crossover, right? Like with Adam and Morgan being on Attack the Show and vice versa. Like there was a mix. It was like West Coast Avengers and the Avengers, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. There was a lot of crossover between the two shows, between Attack of the Show and X-Play. And not necessarily like on an official capacity. Like Paul Bonanno was a producer on X-Play, and he would always ask me to be in stuff just because I could be on camera, and I liked it, and I had a good time. So I would ask him to be on camera for stuff, and we would pull in Leffler to do stuff, and Blair Butler ended up writing for Attack of the Show for many years. And like there was a lot of crossover between the two shows, and X-Play did so much. They had a lot more opportunity to do more like cinematic stuff. Like they did like a whole episode that was Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. They did a whole zombie episode that was amazing. Like they did musical episodes. Like they got to do more sort of like through lines with their episodes, which was so impressive to watch, and really fueled us on Attack of the Show to try to up our game and do something similar. Even if it wasn't necessarily a through line, we tried to do more recurring characters, or have a character come back, a couple episodes a week, or even interrupt the episode a couple times during the show. We tried to do a lot of that stuff too, just to try to be as funny as they were being, or hopefully funnier. And then, hopefully they felt the same way about us. I assume they did. I don't think there was ever any bad blood between anybody on those shows.
I think it was, a very supportive environment, which was, at least my experience up until then, was not the experience I had at other places where I had worked. So it was refreshing. Funny, I don't know if you know the background to this story at all, but maybe you can explain why, and this used to always screw me up, is when I would read teleprompter and they would have things phonetically spelled out.
Oh.
And I know that there's a story behind why that happened. Can you explain why things were phonetically spelled out on teleprompter for for hosts. There was an incident that led to that. I'm pretty sure you know what it is.
Yeah, I think I
tell that story.
I think I know what you're talking about. So teleprompter it's an art form. Both running it and writing for it and reading it are all harder than you would expect them to be. And when you're writing something in teleprompter for a host, it really depends on the host. Some people want stuff spelled phonetically, other people don't, and they just want to learn the word. Some people like certain types of spacing, some people like certain color fonts. And you know, when you're doing a show like Attack, and you're kind of in the groove where you have some stable hosts, like when Kevin and Olivia were hosting, and were pretty consistent hosts for a long time, you kind of get in a groove and knowing who likes what and kind of what they're in for. But, you know, live TV is a place where mistakes are made, and the human brain is a weird thing, especially when you're trying to read prompter, especially because what you're doing is you are reading ahead of what you are saying while you are saying something that you've already read and trying to remember what's coming up next so that you can use the right intonation for stuff. It's a really, really complicated thing that not a lot of people can do. Reading prompter is hard, but your brain is going to fart at certain times when you're on camera, when you're reading prompter, and maybe you see something that's maybe supposed to be MC Hammer, and maybe you pronounce it as Mick Hammer because there's not any lowercase letters. So you just assume MC means Mick and not MC, which is a totally reasonable mistake to make, and also a really good moment in Attack of the Show history.
I mean, that might be one of the best unintentional bits. I mean, that was hilarious. And the fact that the audience was kind of in on the joke and Kevin kind of kept that going was amazing. Like, it was really the magic of, I believe, your writing and the writing team, in addition to hosts just being game. Right?
Oh, yeah.
Like that, can you talk about that, how that was so organic?
Yeah, you know, I don't know if there's a single aspect of Attack of the Show that made it successful. If I had to pick one, it would just be the fact that pretty much everybody who worked on the show legitimately cared about it and really wanted to make it good. You know, the writing team, I am so proud of the writing team on Attack of the Show, and there are still, you know, jokes that we did and wrote on that show that still make me laugh today. But it wasn't just the writers. The producers did this too. Like, the producers would pitch ideas like, let's try to talk to our closed captioning person. Like, that was an idea that someone on the producing team pitched, which was such a weird freaking idea that I would never come up with, and ended up being one of my favorite things that we ever did on Attack of the Show. Or someone would pitch, hey, for Groundhog Day, let's just repeat the A block 5 times in a row and never mention it. And we did that. And like, that is a thing that like, the writers cannot, like, I can't take credit for all that stuff, and the writers can't take credit for that. It's everybody on the team was participating and contributing, and also all the on-air talent that we had, all the on-camera folks, whether you were hosting or a segment producer or a segment reporter or field reporter, everybody was game to do stuff. Everybody, participated in what we gave them. Like, even if they maybe didn't understand it, they sold the hell out of it, and they were really good at what they were doing. All the hosts, especially during the Around the Net stuff, like, that segment is written, there are jokes, there are intros and outros, there are sketches, but a lot of it is just ad-libbing, and a lot of it is just the hosts reading the room reaction, reading the reaction of the other host who's on camera at the same time, and just being game to have fun with it. Everybody was really firing on all cylinders at all times, which is, again, not a thing you find on a lot of anything. Like, that's not a thing you find in an office. That's not a thing you find in a classroom. Like, that's not just a thing you find anywhere. But I do think that for the most part, everybody who worked on these shows legitimately cared about them and wanted them to be really good and wanted them to be a show that they wanted to watch. So everybody kind of brought their own thing into it, which also made that mix really unique and really cool.
when it comes to the sketches on the show, and maybe I can plant a bit of a seed, because you might have to bring some of this into your at top of your memory, actually. It was like almost 8 years, right? So
yeah.
What do you consider to be some of the best sketches and or unplanned moments? The worst bits that went poorly. But I will say this, a caveat. A lot of the things that went poorly actually went great.
Yeah.
Because of they failed, which was funny. And then the other thing is, do you have recollection of bits really hard that just didn't make it? I don't know if that, I don't know if you have a memory of that.
Yeah.
But like, let's start with the best. That's probably the easiest thing first. Best bits, most successful things you're proud of. I think Office Jesus has to be one of them. I didn't know the story about Office Jesus evolved. Originally called Asshole Jesus, I think is great. And came from beautiful drawings of Jesus doing nice things. I love that. But is there more? Can you tell me some of the ones and maybe where they came from? And I'm talking to Brian Keller later this week too, so I'm probably going to ask a lot of the same questions I asked you. I'm asking you maybe questions I'm not asking everybody.
Oh yeah, for Keller, definitely be sure to ask about We Never Got to Dance, because he's the one who brought that song into the show, and we use that song anytime something sad happened. That's the song that we use, and that was his find and his idea. So definitely ask him about that one. In terms of best sketches, oh God, literally, I have, from having to write almost a sketch every day for like 8 years, I don't know if I can remember all of them, to be honest. Office Jesus, I am legitimately proud of. I think it's one of the funniest things that the show has done, mostly because it's just so simple and not super complicated. I also am responsible for I say this slightly embarrassingly, for the Bustus series, which was a superhero whose power was their large chest. I really liked that sketch a lot because it was so stupid and was just meant to be really stupid, and somehow people liked it a lot, enough to keep bringing it back for more and more. In terms of live bits, I really, really loved, similarly, and like, I'm giving you some of the most sophomoric ones here, which is just because I love stupid stuff. But there was a recurring segment called At the Booties, which was two old guys reviewing booty shaking videos from the internet as if they were Siskel and Ebert. And the two actors that we had to play them were so good. One of them is actually, I saw he had a recurring role on the show. I think it's called Hollywood. It's the new Ryan Murphy show. He plays this like old school film editor in there, and he's so good in it. So these two old guys were just so good, and it was Jerry Duggan and I were the ones who kind of spearheaded most of those sketches, and just got really aggressively stupid in doing them. But I also tried to like, every writer and every producer on Attack of the Show kind of brought their element of stuff into it. I by far was the one who was tickled the most by like history jokes and like really heady things, even though I just told you about some really stupid stuff that I did. So there was one bit where in the morning meeting we were trying to decide whether or not some really dumb video was going to be a number one, and it sparked this like intense argument between the writers and producers as to like, is this just stupid or is this so stupid it's genius? And it was like the most animated and the most argumentative that room ever got, and it was all like in good fun, but like people were like really intensely caring about it. So I pitched a reenactment of that morning meeting done in the style of the Continental Congress. So it was Jerry Duggan and I wearing these tri-corner hats and like these like colonial garbs, and like we were basically giving these motions about whether or not something was good enough to be on Around the Net. And that, I think, is also one of my favorite sketches that we ever did, for a totally different reason than Bustus or At the Booties.
Oh my God, I have to ask Jerry about that. It's a funny. I knew Jerry actually before Attack of the Show. He was an editor at SuicideGirls.com.
Yeah.
And he hired me to write movie articles. And now he's a very successful comic writer.
Yeah, very successful comic writer. He's an awesome guy.
I always enjoyed his dry wit. Deadpan wit.
For many years, Jerry sat right next to me on Attack of the Show, and it remains one of my life's supreme joys was to get Jerry to have like a belly laugh, like a really good, strong belly laugh. Whenever we could manage that, that was, it always was like, I'm doing my job. Like, I made Jerry laugh really hard.
Oh, wow. What do you consider, are there things that failed on the show that kind of failed in the best ways? A couple things that come to mind is Olivia jumping in the pie and they put the mattress, missed the mattress. The second thing was, which was actually scary, it was at the end of the show when Kevin jumped on a balloon and then landed face first into cement.
Yes.
It was actually frightening. I remember being there live, and he was really hurt. Among other things that, like, these were not that you're responsible for those things, but like, are there things you can recall that like went wrong, or you can just say, but then sometimes those things, like the McHammer thing was a mistake. It turned out to be one of the funniest things of the show that people always remember.
Yeah, there was. I'm actually remembering one more sketch that I want to mention is one of the best things that we did. So I'll say that really quick. Another one of actually two more of the sketches that I really enjoyed writing on and working on were the Dude Man Ron sketches with Kevin, where I played a silent, not even vaguely but overtly homoerotic wingman to Kevin's hyper-masculine dude Manrod. We did a number of those sketches, and they were always so much fun to work on and write with. Another sketch that I did with Kevin a lot was a series called Legiticorp, which were these... it was this pair of really bungling executives trying to cash in on trends or schemes of the day and just failing wildly. Those were just really fun to write and act in. And the last sketch series that I really liked a lot was a recurring bit called Jeremy's Dragon Corner, where Jeremy Hache, who was one of the producers on the show, dressed up in this like medieval garb and just talked about how cool dragons were. And it was a really weird, really funny bit that he took, like, he played it so seriously. And one of the best things that I ever wrote for the show was Jeremy, in his character on Jeremy's Dragon Corner, wrote a bit complaining about how the dragons in Avatar were bullshit and how they weren't real dragons. And then we had James Cameron come on as a guest, and we said, hey, would you mind filming this rebuttal to Jeremy in Jeremy's Dragon Corner? And he was like, yes, I will totally do this, because James Cameron loved being on Attack of the Show and was down for anything that we made him do, and was such a total blast to have on. So he read this bit that I wrote for him that was basically him schooling Jeremy that he did years and years about space dragon sex, and he said, I'm James Cameron at least 3 times in the bit. He did it all straight-faced. He did it all totally seriously, and it's chef's kiss. It's so good. That's probably my favorite thing that I ever wrote, was that little bit for James Cameron on that show. In terms of things that didn't work, the stuff like Kevin jumping on the balloon or Olivia jumping into the pie, they definitely didn't work, but they weren't like supposed to not work. That was just like, it's a live show and we don't really have a ton of money to make the show, so we don't have maybe all the necessary safety procedures for these sorts of things. But again, to their credit, both Kevin and Olivia like totally rolled with those bits. Like, both of them landed very heavily with full body weight on what was essentially a concrete floor, and like they kept it up as long as the cameras were rolling, which again is a testament to their ability to just like host a live TV show and roll with those punches like that. In terms of sketches that just didn't turn out good, like, I know that we missed the mark on a lot of stuff. That is just the nature of doing a live TV show. But honestly, like, I don't really remember a ton of the stuff that, like, really, really bombed. But what I remember about stuff not working is that very rarely did someone, like, after a sketch bombed, very rarely did, like, someone in the control booth, like, start screaming at one of the producers or screaming at the writers that we could never do anything like that again. It was always done in a way that was like, okay, we tried that thing and it didn't work, and we got another show tomorrow, let's see what we can come up with. By nature of the fact that we had to fill an hour of TV every single day, almost every week of the year, like, there wasn't really time to dwell on stuff or, like, have these, like, long, tedious meetings about why didn't this sketch work and what can we do to fix it. It was like, nope, you tried it, it didn't work, let's try something else. You got to keep feeding that beast, which is honestly, I think, one of the healthiest writing environments I've ever been in. I have been in other shows where you just, like, you spend hours and hours on a joke that didn't work, and it's just like, it was a joke that didn't work. Let's not dwell on it. Let's just try a different joke next time. There's no need to be doing that stuff. And Attack was really great for that because we didn't have the time. We couldn't afford to, like, navel gaze and figure out why something didn't work. We just had to move on and try something else.
It was just, I will say, just not just from where I sat as a fan of the show, and then also being fortunate enough to be on the show, it was just amazing to watch. And when I screwed up, it sucked because it's like, one week I'm going to be thinking about that for a week, where I screwed up in weight block, moving on, and by the 2 blocks, forgot it, or doesn't even care.
Yeah, it is to the truest regard, the show must go on.
Exactly. What were some of can you recall any unused bits or anything where you fought really hard for something and didn't make it on the show? Like, anything?
The only thing that's coming to mind right now that I had pitched that I, like, really wanted to get on the show, mostly just to amuse myself, was I wanted to have a bit during, I don't even remember what the time was or what the context was, but I wanted to have a salt caravan come in on the show. And the premise was that there was a salt caravan that had left sub-Saharan Africa in medieval times when salt was, like, a very precious commodity, and it had just made it out, and now it was trying to sell its salt for really high prices, and they were going to be really bummed to find out that no one cared, and that salt was just, like, a garbage thing that people threw away and were actively avoiding. That almost made it into the very last show. One of our EPs, Joshua Brentano, was like, hey, did you want to do that camel bit? Like, I wanted to get camels to come in and, like, bring piles of salt into the show. And he was like, hey, do you want to do that thing? And I was like, honestly, like, it's a dumb joke that's just for me. Like, we don't really need to spend money on, like, let's save it for the wrap party. Let's not, like, hire camels to come out. And another thing that I always wanted to do was just a golden age of television show, like, do one whole episode in black and white, shot like it was in the 1950s. So, like, old school, that kind of rectangle format, and, like, all the segments would be sponsored by, like, tobacco products that were really unhealthy and, like, alcohol. And I just really wanted, like, a cigarette carton with, like, legs, like sexy lady legs with high heels, like you see in some of those old, like, movie theater ads sometimes, just because anthropomorphic items just make me laugh. It's just a thing that always makes me laugh, and I wanted to put it on TV, but we never got around to that one, and I don't know if that's because I just didn't push hard enough, or people just didn't want to do it, and were too nice to say that my idea was stupid.
I would love to read the script for that salt caravan thing. Maybe we can do it in animation. I don't know. We can bring it to life.
It was a dumb idea that would only make me laugh, but that was also, like, 80% of the stuff I put on Attack of the Show was just to make me laugh. So the thing to remember about Attack of the Show and G4 in general is that we were always about to be canceled. Whether or not that was true, there was always an air in the building, with the exception of maybe 2 or 3 years, kind of like right in the middle when we just felt like no one was paying attention to us and we could do whatever we wanted. Every other time was like, oh, they're going to cancel us. Like, they're like, there's no way this is going to keep going. So, speaking personally, I got a little tired of waiting for things to be canceled and waiting for people to get fired, and just sort of said, look, this is a fun thing, and let's just have fun while we're here and not worry too much about it, because we have literally no control over whether or not we're canceled. We were the people making the show. We were not the people in charge of making decisions about the show for the most part, or how the show was promoted, or whether or not anyone at Comcast or NBC Universal knew what was going on, or if we were just this weird tax write-off on their balance sheet. But definitely toward the end, it was weird, because there were a lot of really fun things that happened in the last couple years of the show. Olivia leaving first was definitely it was a big hit for the show, because it changed the outlook and the makeup of the show by quite a bit. Olivia she brought a lot to that show. She brought her voice, she brought her attitude, she brought her energy. She sold everything that we wrote for her. She delivered amazingly, and was always game to do the dumbest bits that we could come up with for her. And she had great chemistry with Kevin on camera. They were such a great team. And when she left, and I remember there was like this process of auditioning co-hosts, and there were a lot of really awesome folks in the running. That I think some of them ended up kind of like rotating in on the show for a little bit, or doing some other segments. But that it changed the show a little bit, and it changed the makeup of the show. It was just different. It was just a different kind of team to be writing for, and definitely changed the way that we wrote sketches, and it changed the way that we wrote bits for the show. And then once Kevin left, Kevin leaving, his last episode was like, for all intents and purposes, that was sort of the last attack of the show for a lot of people. It certainly felt that way. It felt that way in a good and a bad way. It felt that way because, like, we gave Kevin what I feel was like a proper send-off. Like, we like basically devoted the whole show to him. Everybody showed up. Everybody dressed up for it. Kevin put in years and years and years of work on that show, and even more at G4 before that. So it was like kind of seeing one of the OGs of G4 leave. And we wanted to send him off in a good way. And I think that show did that. I think that show really delivered on that promise. And, still honestly, like, when I see that picture come up, that like group picture of everyone on set come up in my Facebook memories every year, like, I still get like misty eyed looking at it. Like, everyone in that picture is family to me. Even if I don't talk to them every so often, or if I haven't talked to them in a long time, like, I still consider all those people family. Even the folks who left before that, but that definitely like felt like kind of the last attack of the show. But on the flip side, when we had this like rotating guest host thing, which was kind of the last year of the show, we had some really cool people come in and be guest hosts, and they got to work with the writers, which is the thing I always wanted the host to do, but was never really able to get them to do by the time that, but basically by that time Kevin had gone. But I always kind of wanted the host to be in a brainstorming session with the writers for Around the Net, to get their ideas in, to get their takes on stuff, and to get their input. And that really only happened when we had those guest hosts. And we had really good comedy names. We had like Ben Schwartz, we had Michael Ian Black, like, we had really, really good comedians in the mix, and they were so much fun to work with for the most part. There was one who I won't talk about who was awful. Someone else can talk about that. But everybody else was really, really good. And that was like a good way for the writers to like shift their approach every week. Like, we had to like stay on our toes even more than we did when it was Kevin and Olivia, or when it was Kevin and Candace. This was like, oh, okay, so Michael Ian Black's coming in. How is he going to be with the writers? Is he going to work well? Is he going to contribute? Is he going to come up with good ideas? By far the most fun of the guest hosts to work with from the writer's perspective was Ben Schwartz. Ben Schwartz, he's an improv comedian. He is just a really talented performer, and he like rolled up his sleeves with the writers every day and was in the weeds with us. working on scripts, working on bits, working on ideas. And some of his guest host segments are, I think, some of the best things that Attack of the Show ever did. Was his week of hosting. And he had a great time, and all the writers when he left were like begging. We're like, please, if we're going to have a permanent host, like get Ben Schwartz to do this. He's so good at it. And then, of course, we got canceled a couple months later. So that didn't end up happening. But the actual end, like the actual announcement of the end of Attack of the Show and the end of G4 was this very weird thing because everyone kind of knew it was coming. It was the worst kept secret in that building. Everyone knew. We were just waiting for the shoe to drop, and we were waiting for that email, that late Thursday email of an all-company meeting before everybody left on Friday. And we saw it come, and we all like, this is the one. This is where we all get canceled. And the president of the network came in, and he was basically just said, we're all canceled. We're done through the end of December, and then we're done. And honestly, at that point, it was just like a relief because everybody was worrying about being canceled for so long, in some cases years, that it was like, okay, well now we at least know we're going to get paid through this day. Then maybe we'll get a severance package if we're lucky, or we'll at least go on unemployment. But until then, we're working, and no one really cares what's going on, which is kind of the best time to be working at G4 is when no one cares what you're putting on TV. So it was a time to be weird and wonderful again, and we got some really cool, fun stuff on the show after that. But it was a weird time. I don't know if there is a good way to handle a show being canceled, but I don't think that the way that they handled it was a good way.
A big question is this. The humor on Attack of the Show I found to be so unique and very influential, especially when it comes to YouTubers. I look at YouTube.
Yeah.
I don't think YouTube would be what it is now if not for Attack of the Show before. It's kind of YouTube is basically the children of G4 TV.
Yeah.
It's pretty incredible how influential it was. So a couple things I want to ask is, what is the legacy of Attack of the Show, and how has fandom changed from 2005 when everything first launched to now we're coming up on the 20th anniversary of G4 in 2022?
Yeah.
How has fandom changed? What is the legacy of Attack of the Show?
I cannot tell you how surprised I have been and how consistently surprised I have been to meet people who watched Attack of the Show and loved it. Because when you were on Attack of the Show, your interaction with fans were like maybe 20% of the people had something nice to say. Maybe 60% of the people wanted Tech TV back and wanted to know where Leo Laporte was. And 40% of the people, if that math works out, I was a communications major, if 40% of the people just had no idea what you were talking about or who you were. So to meet people who like not only watched G4 and Attack of the Show, but like loved it, has always been a weird experience to me, because I always felt like we were making TV in a bubble. Like I always felt like I was making TV for the people 2 cubicles down who I wanted to make laugh. That's always the vibe I had working on Attack of the Show. And to meet other people who knew it is still weird. But it is, you have to remember, like, we were around like before streaming video was really a thing. We were around before social media was really a thing. We were around well before esports and live casting were a thing. We were like, I honestly think G4 was probably like 3 years too early to be successful. I think if we had come out just a little bit later and people were a little bit more familiar with some of these things, that we were, in many ways, the first people on TV to even be talking about or showing. Like, what other show in like 2006 was talking about 4chan? Like, nobody. It was Attack of the Show. Like, we were always the ones who were ahead of the game on that stuff, and that's something I'm really, really proud of. I hope that the influence of Attack of the Show has been that internet culture is a thing. I hope that what people took from Attack of the Show was that you can be playful and make fun of each other, but at the end of the day, we're all in this together. That was the staff of the show. We were all like that. Like, I'm a history nerd. I didn't know anything about comic books, but I sat next to Blair Butler and Jerry Duggan, who knew a ton about comic books. I didn't know anything about like BBC stuff and Doctor Who and like the British sci-fi stuff, but we had Liz Miller, who was like a super big Doctor Who nerd and like knew all that stuff. Like everybody brought their own little superpower of nerd world knowledge into this, and the sum was really greater than its parts. And we did make fun of people, but it was always from a place of belonging. There were other shows that were talking about the internet at this time, but the tone was always, look at that nerd in their basement, aren't they stupid? And our tone was always, we are in the basement with you, we are both stupid, and let's play some Smash Brothers to end out this day. Like, that was the tone that we had, and I hope that that gets picked up in a lot of the YouTuber content. I feel like for the most part it does. That as time has gone on, the internet has become a lot more fragmented and fractured. Part of that is just because like special interest groups on YouTube, not like a company, but like a specific thing that you're into, they've gotten a lot more granular. Like there's a subreddit for everything now. You can find a community for everything, which is awesome. Like when I was starting at G4 in 2004, like that was not a thing that happened. Like the internet was for nerds and weirdos and outcasts and people like me who really wanted to play Dungeons and Dragons but didn't have anyone in their friend group in their small farming town in Connecticut that wanted to play D&D. So like the internet was where I went. Like that's what I did. I built websites. I was a nerd. I found other nerds and we talked about nerdy stuff on the internet. Now it's become a little bit more corporatized in a way. Most of the internet now is done through social media. You think about how often you look at internet through something like Facebook or Reddit or Instagram, and that is just not the way that, the people who did G4, people like me, I'm the oldest millennial, like I didn't grow up learning the internet like that. Like I went to specific websites, or I used something like Google Reader when it was still around to like sign up for RSS feeds for the sites that I liked. There was no gatekeeper telling me, oh, here's a thing that other people are talking about, or here's a thing that we have found causes a lot of reaction and strong emotional reactions in people, so I'm going to serve this to you, but you're not going to see something interesting that you actually might be interested in. So the internet's a really different place now. There's also like, in a really good way, the internet is a much more diverse and open place now. There's a lot more opportunities for different voices. G4 and Attack of the Show were really, really great shows, but they were pretty overwhelmingly white and pretty overwhelmingly heteronormative. Despite the fact that I'm a queer guy, there were some queer writers on both shows, and a lot of queer sensibility made it into both Attack of the Show and X-Play, but they were pretty straight shows. And now the internet's a little bit more open with stuff like that. There more voices are heard at the table now, which is a really, really good thing. I don't know in terms of like fans and what fans are like now. We sort of hit the internet like the last, this is kind of wistful, but I sort of think of it as like the last couple years the internet was a fun place to be around. Right before like kind of 4chan got really big and like things like Gamergate happened. Like we were one of the first people to talk about Gamergate and these like, hate groups on the internet and these really toxic speeches and like doxing and like all the really nasty stuff on the internet. That's all kind of commonplace now, and we didn't really have to deal with a lot of that when we were doing Attack of the Show, and certainly not like when we were starting at G4, starting up, whenever our journeys at G4 started. So that's definitely a different thing now. And also just there's a lot more options. For stuff. There's more people streaming. There's more places to look at things. There's stuff like Twitch and Instagram Live and YouTube Live and so many different places to have your voice heard and have this like sort of streaming content sent out. I think there's definitely a space for it. I think that sensibility that G4 had of like irreverence and poking fun at yourself and also being in the know on things, that's an attitude that I think remains in a lot of vloggers today. It's in the same way that like kind of Gawker and the Gawker blog created the language of blogging in a way. I think that G4 and Attack of the Show and X-Play sort of created the language of like nerd sensibility in video, whether you're on TV or doing vlogging or streaming. I think there's a lot of if you look back at what G4 was doing, I think you'll find a lot of similarities and a lot of like early starts at that stuff.
Looking at the humor, looking at a lot of the sort of attitude of Attack of the Show, can you do Attack of the Show today in today's environment? You mentioned earlier, like so many things in a positive way, just especially with regard to diversity, inclusion, and other people having voices. But there are also some sensitivities that come into play, and some are for very good reason. Just let's not be assholes, right? Like that's your number one. But like, can you do Attack of the Show in the same way that you did then today? How do you approach it?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question. I don't think you could do Attack of the Show the way that we did it today. And in terms of just like, in just form, I don't think people would watch an hour-long variety show like that, the way that it was formatted. I think you could definitely like condense it or maybe work it around. Then again, like people watch live streams for like 4 or 5 hours at a time. I've never had the patience for those personally, but like I do know that people watch them. So maybe someone would watch that. But I think that one of the things that sort of kept Attack of the Show going, even though it was an hour long, is it was like this very modular thing. There was like, around the net was this sort of like hodgepodge of stuff that was from all over the internet. Then you'd have a gadget review segment. Then you'd have a field package about some new car. Then you'd have a news segment. Then you'd have an interview. Like it was a little bit of everything, which I don't know if I really know a show that's doing stuff like that right now, other than like regular talk shows, which is kind of like what Attack of the Show was formatted on anyway. I don't know if that would work. I think it might work in a condensed format, or maybe it's like a 15-minute thing that's like really fast and you don't get every segment every day, but there are things that swap around. I think that would work. I think definitely the tone and the style of Attack of the Show do work because they're very like fundamentally internet. It's internet voice, it's internet tone, it's internet joking, it's internet like kind of like elbow ribbing to other internet people. I think that works, and I think that is needed on the internet. In terms of like dealing with fans, I am sure that we did stuff that would not fly today. I'm sure of it. I don't know of any off the top of my head, and I can guarantee you that none of it was ill-advised or like done with bad intent. But I know that we did some stuff that probably wouldn't fly these days. And there's also an attitude of, well, if you're doing something like Attack of the Show and you're doing what you think is funny and you feel like you are doing the work and you're putting in the legwork to making sure that you're not being hurtful to someone else in another community, and you are hopefully having someone from that community represented on your show in some capacity, whether they're a writer or a producer, and they feel that they can stand up and say, hey, that's not a cool thing to do. If you're putting in that legwork and you want to take a chance on something, I think go for it. I think there's this big contingent of, there is a backlash to that, like whatever the correctness culture or whatever it's called, which I think is kind of unfounded, where most of that is done in a way that's good with good intents. But you also have this flip side of people who kind of think that they can say anything, and if you're being offensive, but you're acknowledging that you're being offensive, that makes it okay. And I've never really thought that flies. There's a lot of shows that do that very successfully that have been around for much longer than Attack of the Show has been on, that still kind of get away with flying under that. And I feel like that's a thing that maybe it's good that we don't do that stuff anymore. Not that I ever felt that Attack of the Show did that, but I feel like that's an easy line to cross if you're not really paying attention to it. But I hope that we can find a way to continue that spirit of Attack of the Show, because at the end of the day, Attack of the Show was interested in things. It never took itself seriously. It made fun of itself before it made fun of you. If it did make fun of you, it was always done in a friendly manner. And at the end of the day, we're all nerds on the internet. That was always the tone of Attack of the Show. So if we can get that vibe again, I think you can definitely do something similar in today's day and age.
I feel like, Casey, you could do like a mic drop or something.
I think about this stuff a lot.
Thank you
I don't know if you can tell.
Yeah, well, yeah, I do as well. I do as well. It's just, I just wish people were nicer to each other online and more empathetic. But I think empathy is the thing that the internet doesn't like.
It doesn't give you clicks. So, yeah.
No. The voices that are amplified are the most extreme, and we're kind of, I feel like being pitted against each other, and I not like that.
Yeah, it's honestly like, even aside from G4, like even something with as innocuous as like Modern Hiker, like it's just impossible for me to get good reactions from people anymore, because if I say something that's interesting and good, nobody sees it because Facebook doesn't give it to anybody. And if I do get something seen, it's seen by the worst people who only want to shit on stuff and like cause problems. It's like, what is the point of this? It's exhausting. It's not a good place to be in for the internet.
Even with what I do on Film Threat, like I don't consider myself like I'm a part of Film Twitter, but if you look at the Film Threat website, we're constantly championing, films that don't get any love anywhere else, and they don't even get a lot of amplification on social media, which is really disheartening. Because I think there's a lot of talk in Hollywood about inclusion and diversity. I don't think it's really changed as much as people would like to think. And so there's just a lot of just like, we were to speak about this stuff, but in action, it's not there.
Yeah.
It's not as much as it, just as someone who's like done, I've been doing film threats since I started in high school. I didn't know much about my story, but like, we cover indie films. I've covered queer cinema back to like when I discovered John Waters when I was 16 years old.
Oh yeah.
That was one of my favorite filmmakers. But just like all that stuff, like it doesn't get kind of amplification as one would hope.
Yeah, I almost think that I hope that in some capacity people will just get sick of social media and move away from it. I don't know if that's going to happen, but I think that maybe that original community, like those of us who were on message boards and BBSs, back in the mid 90s and late 90s, like maybe we will leave social media and just go do our own thing again. I have sort of found, like, honestly, like for Modern Hiker, email is better than social media. Like my fucking MailChimp like list gets me better responses. I feel better doing it. Like I'm a fucking email newsletter now, like, because social media is garbage. But I hope that there's some move away from that, or at least a realization that social media is not what it sold itself to us as.
Absolutely. God, Casey, thank you so much.